President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly emphasized, Russia has been and remains open to negotiations on eliminating the root causes of the conflict. Russia's security and its vital interests must be reliably guaranteed. The rights of Russians and Russian-speaking people in the territories that remain under the control of the Kiev regime must be restored in full. On this basis, we are ready to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine. So far, neither Kiev nor its European sponsors seem to realize the gravity of the situation or to be willing to negotiate honestly. The North Atlantic Alliance continues to expand right up to our borders, contrary to assurances given to Soviet leaders to advance not a single inch to the east. Contrary to the commitments made by NATO members at the OSCE to respect the principles of the indivisibility of security and not to strengthen their own security at the expense of others and not to strive for dominance, we repeatedly propose that NATO capitals respect their commitments and agree on legally binding security guarantees. Our proposals in 2008 and the subsequent ones, including in December 2021, have been ignored and continue to be ignored to this day. Moreover, threats of the use of force against Russia are increasingly being made. Russia is being accused of almost planning to attack the North Atlantic Alliance and the European Union countries. President Putin has repeatedly debunked these provocations. Russia has never had and does not have any such intentions. However, any aggression against my country will be met with a decisive response. There should be no doubt about this among those in NATO and the EU who not only are telling their voters that war with Russia is inevitable and are forcing them to tighten their belts, but are also openly talking about preparations for an attack on our Kaliningrad Oblast and other Russian territories. We have some hopes for the continuation of the Russian-American dialogue, especially after the summit in Alaska. In the approaches of the current US administration, we see a desire not only to contribute to ways to realistically resolve the Ukrainian crisis, but also a desire to develop pragmatic cooperation without adopting an ideological stance. Russia and the US bear a special responsibility for the state of affairs in the world and for avoiding risks that could plunge humanity into a new war. The maintenance of strategic stability is the aim of a new initiative by the Russian Federation that was put forward by President Putin on the 22nd of September. It concerns Russia's readiness to adhere to the central quantitative limits of the New START treaty for 1 year after its expiry on the 5th of February 2026. This is upon the condition that the United States acts similarly and does not take steps that would violate the existing balance of deterrence capabilities.
Madam President, Excellencies, while asserting our rights, we must also firmly face up to threats. Countering terrorism is a particular priority because it synthesizes bigotry, violence, intolerance, and fear. India has confronted this challenge since independence, having a neighbor that is an epicenter of global terrorism. For decades now, major international terrorist attacks are traced back to that one country. UN's designated lists of terrorists are replete with its nationals. The most recent example of cross-border barbarism was the murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam in April this year. India exercised its right to defend its people against terrorism and brought its organizers and perpetrators to justice. Because terrorism is a shared threat, Madam President, it is essential that there is much deeper international cooperation. When nations openly declare terrorism a state policy, when terror hubs operate on an industrial scale, when terrorists are publicly glorified, then such actions must be unequivocally condemned. The financing of terrorism must be choked even as prominent terrorists are sanctioned. Relentless pressure must be applied on the entire terrorism ecosystem. Those who condone nations that sponsor terror will find that it comes back to bite them. Madam President, an objective report card will show that the UN is in a state of crisis. When peace is under threat from conflicts, when development is derailed by lack of resources, when human rights are violated by terrorism, the UN remains gridlocked. As its ability to forge common ground diminishes, belief in multilateralism also recedes. Central to the erosion of the UN's credibility has been resistance to reform. Most members strongly desire change, but the process is being made an obstacle to the outcome. It is imperative that we see through this cynicism and purposefully address the reform agenda.
As Germans, we are deeply grateful for this opportunity, but it also means we feel particularly responsible for our United Nations. As Albert Einstein wrote in 1947, quote, "No international organization can be stronger than its component parts want it to be." In other words, it is up to us, the member states. We are the United Nations. We want these United Nations to be strong. Today, my country is running again for a seat as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for 2027-28 term. We do so at a time of unprecedented instability and upheaval. In Sudan and neighboring countries, we are witnessing the worst humanitarian catastrophe of our time. Over 30 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, over 12 million forced to flee their homes. We all need to do more to end this tragedy. The security of the entire region is on the line. The terrible war in Gaza is raging on, hell on earth, a humanitarian nightmare as we speak. This war must end. The hostages must be released. The existence and the security of Israel will always be part of our raison d'etre. There must be a future in peace and in dignity for all in the Middle East. As we have reaffirmed in this hall this week, 2 states for 2 peoples, the only solution.
The past quarter century has shown that many in the West have been unable to abandon their centuries-old mentality. As a result, the West has not become a leader in the process of change, but rather a source of threats and losses. Certain Western elites that are accustomed to living for centuries at the expense of others continue to exhibit a colonial mindset, albeit a modernized one. It's no surprise that even today they continue to display arrogance and power that they exert over developing countries, which was characteristic of colonial times. Our African friends can speak very eloquently about colonial times, and incidentally they're calling for reparations as well for the harm caused by the West. Over the past quarter of a century, then, we have seen the West not working together to solve development problems, but rather imposing democracy and the weaponization of the economy. This policy has spawned many wars, chaos, millions of refugees, created barriers to international trade, undermined global food security, entrenched poverty, hunger, and inequality, and international organizations, chief among them the UN and the WTO, have been sidelined. That is why, in response to these negative trends, the idea of regionalization is becoming popular, and cooperation mechanisms that aren't linked to Western countries, such as, well, as I already mentioned, the BRICS, SCO, ASEAN, CIS, the League of Arab States, and the African Union, they're growing and strengthening. They reflect the interests of the global majority countries. They work on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and consensus, rather than domination and plunder. They essentially are forming a fair multipolar economic architecture for development, and it's only natural then that the Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward a very timely initiative on global governance, which Belarus fully supports. Mr. President, the words of the great Italian thinker of the past century, Antonio Gramsci, who wrote "From a fascist prison," are more relevant today than ever. The old world is dying, and the new world is struggling to be born. It is indeed paradoxical that even today the new world is being born in agony, because the old world does not want to quietly leave the stage. We're not the ones destroying the old world. The West itself is doing a perfectly fine job of that.
Mr. President, we affirm our commitment to joint action based on mutual respect and the principles of international law, which boosts mutual confidence and lays the foundations for security, stability, and sustainable development. The Kingdom continues to strengthen ties of good neighborliness, respect for the sovereignty of states, and de-escalation, and contributes to achieving calm as a means to bolster security and stability in the region and the world. In this context, Saudi Arabia strongly condemns the Iranian attack on sisterly Qatar, which runs counter to our work to build ties of good neighborliness. Saudi Arabia condemns in the strongest of terms the continued Israeli aggressions in the region, including the recent blatant attack on sisterly Qatar. We call for international action to stop these violations. We call for international measures to put a stop to Israel's actions and to deter it from such criminal behavior that threatens the region's security and stability. Based on our firm conviction of the importance of regional security and stability and preventing a nuclear arms race in our region, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia stresses the need to adhere to the non-proliferation regime to achieve a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. With respect to the right of states to the peaceful use of nuclear energies in accordance with international regulations, the Kingdom affirms that the diplomatic track is the way to address the issue of Iran's nuclear program and calls for positive engagement in negotiations and cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Dear President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the main substance of speeches of all leaders of the Republic of Armenia from this rostrum has been dedicated to the conflict between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Such were also my speeches from 2018 to 2023. Last year, speaking at the 79th session of the General Assembly, I tried for the first time to speak not about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but about peace. My narrative was very cautious, very uncertain, although at that time already more than 12 kilometers of the Armenia-Azerbaijan interstate border had been demarcated for the first time, and the regulations on the joint activities of the demarcation commissions of the two countries had been signed by the two deputy prime ministers. After my speech, pivotal events have occurred in Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. Firstly, the regulations on the joint activities of the demarcation commissions were ratified in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, receiving the highest legal force. This is the first bilateral international document signed and ratified between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In this document, the 1991 December 21 Alma-Ata Declaration is mentioned as the basic principle of border demarcation between the two countries. I'm referring to the demarcation of the interstate border. Thus, the optimistic processes of the preceding period continued over the past year. In March of this year, Armenia and Azerbaijan were able to agree upon a draft agreement on establishing peace and interstate relations and to conclude the negotiations on the draft with such a positive outcome. In that document, too, the parties, referring to the Alma-Ata Declaration, confirmed their understanding that the borders between the former Soviet Socialist republics of the USSR have become the international borders of the respective independent states, and on this basis, they recognize and respect each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, inviolability of international borders, and political independence. As you have now seen, the reference to the Alma-Ata Declaration means that both countries recognize that the territory of the Republic of Armenia is identical with the territory of the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, and the territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan is identical with the territory of the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, and the borders encompassing these territories are inviolable. The aforementioned agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan was initialed on August 8th of this year in the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., at the White House, by the foreign ministers of the two countries, in the presence of the U.S. President, the President of Azerbaijan, and myself. The culmination of the meeting that took place at the White House on August 8th, these efforts are to include unimpeded connectivity between the main parts of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic through the territory of the Republic of Armenia, with reciprocal benefits for international and intrastate connectivity for the Republic of Armenia. It was also noted that the Republic of Armenia will work with the United States of America and mutually determined third parties to set forth a framework for the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, the TRIP Route connectivity project in the territory of the Republic of Armenia. We confirmed our determination to pursue efforts in good faith to achieve this goal in the most expeditious manner